we're here tonight. And I want to thank, first and foremost, all the people who made tonight possible. I mentioned my team, but also so many partners who are co-hosting this with us. So I'm going to pause because there are several screens. But nothing, we all know that nothing of consequence happens anywhere, at any level, and certainly not here in the great state of Illinois, without lots of people coming together to make it happen. And so I want to thank the many partners. These reflect people that we work with all year round on so many issues, but really also appreciate your support on a night like tonight. Also want to thank our Legislative Host Committee, who I think share with us the view that things are coming fast and furious from the federal government. There may be people who are like excited, like they're seeing some things, move that they're excited about. There are people who are scared. There are people who are just confused. There are people who are all of those things, depending on which day and which action we're talking about, who I think share our view that it's appropriate for us to take a minute to understand what's happening, to make sense of it, and then to remember that there's a lot of things that we still have control and agency over. And so with that, what I want to do is invite up to give you a more formal welcome, and then you'll get me again. I'm so sorry. But you get a nice break from that with Representative Norma Hernandez. She represents the 77th District. She's from Melrose Park. She has been dedicated to issues relating to urban and urban poverty for her entire career. So it's not a surprise that she's co-chair of the Latino Caucus now, and that she has been a fierce advocate, having been a hometown person, I think is at Aurora, UIC, and then you were on the board of Triton College. There aren't many parts of the system in higher education or the state that you haven't touched and that you don't care about. So she is a fierce advocate, and we've been so enjoying and appreciating working with you on higher education issues. So if you would help kick us off, please welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Robin. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. I just first want to give you all a round of applause because you guys inspire me, and I know that you're changing lives every single day to our young people, so thank you. I know there's a lot of long hours, a lot of weekends, and also a lot of advocacy and fighting that we're all doing in our own individual capacity. I did a lot of it when I used to work at UIC. That work is additional work to what we're already supposed to be doing. But thank you for the introduction, Robin. I'm State Representative Norma Hernandez, and I am proudly serving my hometown of Melrose Park, and also got the opportunity to chair the Latino Caucus in this cycle for my second term. But I was also someone whose life was transformed by the access of higher education. And I will be honest, that path for me was actually very difficult. I graduated from public school, went to Proviso East High School in Maywood, and then went to community college, to Triton College, and really found it challenging, liked a lot of, mentorship, financial barriers that I encountered, and the absence of representation is almost pushed me out. I can't tell you how many times I almost dropped out of community college because it was so difficult for me at the time. But I am here today because of the people, my community that supported me, the programs that exist, and the public investments that I believe are what are making a difference now for students. And that is why this moment feels so critical personally to me, but I know to many of you as well. And across the country in Illinois, the federal landscape is shifting in ways that are already reshaping higher education. And we are seeing a rollback of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, the loss of critical federal investments in Hispanic serving institutions, and the immigration policies, right, that are creating fear in our communities. And these decisions are not abstract. They are already impacting whether students are showing up to class, whether they enroll at all, and whether they believe higher education is a place for them. We are hearing directly from educators and administrators that enrollment declines are accelerating. And it's not because students lack talent or ambition, but because they lack stability, safety, and support. And when families are living in fear of deportation, when students lose access to culturally responsive programs, and when institutions lose federal funding streams designed to help them serve historically underserved populations, these consequences have ripple effects that are going to impact us across our entire state. And in Illinois is already starting to feel like a place of vulnerability. Our state has experienced some of the deepest enrollment declines in the country, while students face some of the highest tuition rates as well. And this is not by accident. We know this is years of disinvestment. And it's because of these years of disinvestment and inequitable funding structures and policy decisions, sorry if this is moving, and policy decisions that have made college feel like it's too far out of reach for many working families. And now at a time where we should be rebuilding trust and expanding opportunity, federal actions threaten to deepen those losses. But we do have the ability and the responsibility to act strategically and proactively. And we must strengthen coordinations between our universities and state agencies and our legislature. But we must protect these programs. And we know these cultural centers, scholarship pipelines, and mentorship initiatives, these are the programs that are lifelines for students. They improve retention, we know this. They increase graduation rates and create pathways into our workforce. So it's urgent that our university leaders hold firm. Now is the time to not retreat from diversity and equity and inclusion. These programs have proven that they're valued not only in supporting students, but in strengthening our institutions and our economy. Rolling them back will not solve our challenges. It will actually accelerate them, and it'll accelerate enrollment decline and further destabilize institutions already facing financial strain. So as legislators, we must hold a clear eye on what's at stake. Our higher ed system is directly tied to the future of Illinois workforce, the economy, competitiveness, and social mobility. If students cannot afford to enroll, if immigrant students are pushed into the shadows, and if institutions lose resources needed to support diverse student populations, the consequences will not be temporary. They will shape our state for decades. And my story and the story of many students across the state are proof that when we invest in people, they invest back into our communities. And it is on us to ensure that higher ed does not become impossible for the next generation. And it is on us to protect access, to strengthen our institutions, and to make it clear that Illinois will continue to lead even in the moments where there is so much federal uncertainty. Because you know who's watching? Our students are watching. Our mentors are watching. And our soon-to-be professionals are also watching. And when families are counting on us, and the decisions we make now will determine whether higher ed remains a pathway for opportunity or if it becomes a privilege that very few will have the opportunity to be a part of. And one of the things that I want to end with is I have spent many years working at UIC fighting for what we're fighting for right now. And when I meet with my folks at UIC and other campuses frequently because that fight is getting harder. Less money, more work, less opportunity to hire students to help them in the work. That's an emotional toll that many of us understand it's heavy on us. So I know that my colleagues, Representative Ammons, along with many others, we're really trying to make sure that this passes because I don't think we have a choice. And that's how I want to look at it. I don't think we have a choice. We have to do something. So I encourage you to tell your students to come to Springfield as well on advocacy days because that pressure needs to be applied. And if we don't do this now, I don't think we can wait another year. Our schools need money now. We can't afford to make sure that they feel like they're neglected. Last year, it was disappointing to not pass the higher ed funding formula, but I feel like this is the year we need to. And your presence here tells me how important this issue is to you too. So thank you all for having me today.
I also want to recognize, I appreciate that so many legislators have made time. I know this is busy. There are things happening all around Springfield. So appreciate that we've got Senator Lightfoot, Senator Balkema, Representative Norma Hernandez, Representative Ammons, Representative Hirschauer, Representative Katzenmule, Representative Favor-Diaz, Representative Mussman, Representative Stewart, Representative Guzzardi. I'm going to let you all clap at the end of it, but there's too many. If we clapped in the middle, we'd never get to the body of the show. As well as Senator Sims will be showing up after a few budgeteering conversations. So thank you guys for being here. I did say Lightfoot. I started with Lightfoot. Didn't I say Lightfoot? I said Lightfoot. I'm trying to go back to the beginning. There we go. But Lightfoot, now you got an extra mention, so you can thank Jim for that. That is so sweet. The reason I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for this conversation is I think it's a deeply important one. Advance Illinois, for those who don't know us, and I think most of you do, we're an independent bipartisan organization. We've been around for 18 years, and we do not work at the federal level. And we haven't had to work at the federal level because the federal has been pretty stable. It moves along, it doesn't do everything perfectly, but it's largely lurching in the directions. It's very reliable. When they say they're going to send you money, they send you the money. They're the most reliable thing going. And all of a sudden, the deck has been changed in unbelievably profound and multi-directional ways. And it behooves us to understand it, because if we understand it, then we can start to, get our legs under us and decide what are the right things for Illinois to do in the face of that. Where are there opportunities we can take advantage of, and where are there challenges that we need to address? And there are both opportunities and challenges. I'm not sure it's evenly spread, but there are both. So I want to just start, before we turn to our keynote, who is fabulous, to set the table that I hope that as you are listening, you listen with action in mind. Because it's not enough to understand it, though we need to. But all these changes, there are rhymes and there are reasons and there are objectives that are afoot. And we need to understand them. And we need to make sure that we're on top of them, that we're figuring out how to monitor and navigate a level of change that I've never seen in the 30-plus years I've been doing this. Scott Palmer, when introduced, is going to tell you he's never seen it. In the 50 years plus, is that how many? No, I'm just kidding. We're about the same age. I like to think he's been around longer. But that more importantly, we have tools, we have agency. I know it feels a little bit like whack-a-mole and we're on our back feet because so much is coming at us so fast. But we've got legal, legislative, regulatory, budget, communications, and bully pulpit at our disposal. It's a question of us coming together, understanding the lay of the land, and putting them to use. What should Illinois be doing? What do our constituency needs? How do we work together to make good things happen? There are opportunities. We're going to focus more on challenges because honestly, that may be more desperate and more important, but there are some pretty important positive opportunities and decisions we're going to have to make as well. And we're going to need to consider how to assess those opportunities and put them to use in a way that meets Illinois' needs, values, and priorities. But what's at stake? Let me just open this up a little bit. So first of all, on the funding front, I know we're all living with the fact that for the first time, dollars have been clawed back. I mean, you expect with the new administration there are going to be changes in budgets and priorities. That's to be expected. Elections have consequences. But what we're seeing is the administration came in and they started taking money that had been promised, canceling it, but then it wasn't canceled because there was a lawsuit and then it was changed. And like, we're not going to give you that, but no, maybe we will give you that. So much uncertainty, as well as significant changes afoot potentially in how dollars would flow to states. Many more block grants, which can be good, it can create flexibility, but it can also mean that special student populations are left by the wayside and there are not the protections in place, and or that it's easier to cut those dollars altogether. There's reduced federal civil rights support. We've seen the Office for Civil Rights cut more than in half. Some of those positions were cut, then they were brought back. But the overall scale of the caseload, about 90% of cases, as I was told last year, were resolved without investigation. 90%. With half of the staff in place to cover them. Reductions in Medicaid and SNAP, you've read about this, I'm sure. They're going to be rolling out over time. It hasn't hit yet, but they're going to have, if you watch what the cumulative effect is going to be over the next few years, it's profound. And it's got impacts even beyond just the dollars in terms of just who's eligible, the way that we're creating those eligibilities. Obviously, immigration enforcement has been front page news everywhere in the country, certainly in Illinois and in Minnesota, which is, as I can't put it any better than Representative Hernandez did, creating a lot of fear and confusion at the local level. And fear and confusion, I want to be quick to add beyond just the immigrant community. To think that when there is fear among your classmates and your families, that doesn't affect everyone in a school or in a classroom, I think is to misunderstand how things work. And deeply shifting priorities in higher education. And like everything else, it's not that every one of these issues that we're talking about, there might not have been issues, but just sweeping very broad pushback in higher education on how they should go about their business, canceling research and other contracts that are deeply important to higher education academia, changes to who's allowed to attend, including international students. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Deep changes in education data and research. We'll talk more about that in a minute, about at least I think in Illinois, I don't know the numbers of how many research contracts were canceled. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I think nationally, I mean, it's in the billions. It's in the billions of billions of billions. And then data sets that have disappeared from websites, and they've come back, but then they're disaggregated differently, or they've announced, the feds have announced they're not going to do this data set in the future, but maybe they will. So a lot more uncertainty about the data that we all need in order to make informed decisions at the policy and the practice level. But there are, as I said, some good opportunities coming. Workforce Pell, trying to expand Pell eligibility for workforce, short-term workforce programs. That needs to be done carefully, but that is an opportunity. Tax credit scholarships, lots that we don't know, but lots that we need to understand. And then early investment accounts is what I'm calling them, where children can get tax advantage dollars and parents can put them in. That is a good thing as well. So we need to figure out where the government is stepping back and we can lean in, but there's plenty of places we can't fill in all the federal gaps. There's just no way. It's not doable. It's not doable. So we have to lean in where we can. We're going to have to be judicious about that, and then we're going to have to figure out other ways of managing and mitigating, and I know I only have a minute, so I'm not going to talk even faster. This is how it's showing up in Illinois, folks. The feds canceled out of nowhere full-service community school grants that had been promised, and that affected about 32 different districts. It was millions, tens of millions of dollars. You can see it affected every part of the state. Just want you to think there's any one little area. Increased media reports of ICE enforcement all over the state, and I want you to know, people think, oh, that was just Chicago. It has not been just Chicago. I need you to understand that. Look at the green. It's a little bit hard to see against the blue, but also, ICE happening around the state, disrupting, creating fear, lowering enrollment, all the things you heard Rep. Hernandez talk about. Universities and colleges who report a drop of international student enrollment greater than 10%. Western Illinois, 50% drop in international students. And I want you to be clear, at a very crass level, those generally are full tuition paying, and so we need that economically. But who wants to turn away talent? It has been a great source of strength for the country that we attract the best and the brightest from around, that our university system is well known internationally to be the best in the business, and we get a lot of talent that way. But this is how many universities in yellow that have dropped more than 10%. I know I'm going faster. Disrupted research grants, billions of dollars. Northwestern alone lost more than $1 billion. Over 700 research grants just from that one university alone. There isn't a university here that has not been affected in this state. And then finally, I think it made a lot of news. Everybody knew that the programs, about $1 billion out of nowhere, the Fed said, well, we're just going to cancel. We think there's some problems in Minnesota. And while we're looking at those, we're just going to cancel these 4 states entirely. They were all blue states. And you want to believe that that was not part of the equation, because it shouldn't be. But you worry about it. But that's $1 billion out of nowhere that all of a sudden Illinois is not going to have. That's 60% of the dollars we rely on for our child care assistance programs that are bundled together. And it affects every corner of this state in one way, shape, form, or another. So I want you to understand what is at stake, and with that, to make sense of all of this. Why are all these things happening? Is there a rhyme? Is there a reason? Scott's going to come up. He's going to talk here, and he's going to you're going to feel calmer just listening to him. I promise. You listen to me and you're all like agitated. He will then make sense of it. And while he's making his way up, I will brag about Scott. Scott is the one of the co-founders and managing partners at EducationCounsel. EducationCounsel is an organization just a little bit older than Advance Illinois. And what they do is they've got brainy, wonky legal types that look at education, the lay of the land, and advise for policy, particularly at the federal level, but also at the state level. We have been relying on Scott and his partners' good counsel since the day we got started. But I will tell you, the minute all this federal stuff started to happen, they started to have regular calls with people like us, and it was a godsend. And so I want to say publicly what I've said to Scott many times. He makes sense of a lot of complexity. He won't be able to get through all of it. But Scott, thank you so much for being here and fighting through the East Coast snow to get here, getting up at 2:30 this morning to make it work. On to you. I know, extra round of applause.
Let me thank Robin and Advance Illinois. I'm honored to be here. Let me thank all of you for taking the time to be here and for the incredible work you do. As Robin said, my very simple task is to try to make sense of what is happening in federal education policy right now and what it means for state leadership. And I can't think of a more important moment for state leadership. Let me just say that is a lot. And I would love with more time to talk with you about a bigger vision in this moment and other big drivers of change. Forgive me as I just dive in, and forgive me as I talk maybe not as fast as Robin, but fast nonetheless. Let me start with just some things that I hope you will hear and not hear in my comments. So first, I hope you won't hear these as political. Mine, like Robin's, is a nonpartisan and bipartisan shop, but we're not value neutral. So we believe in the vital role of education, the vital federal role in education, the importance of education to equitable opportunity for each and every child to achieve their full potential, that our diversity is both a reality and a strength, right? These things have not traditionally been political, but they have over the last year become politicized. And saying that doesn't mean that in every one of the areas I'm going to talk about, there aren't real challenges or real issues, but that doesn't necessarily translate or equate to the priorities that are being pursued. As was mentioned, I am a lawyer and a wonk, so I'll talk legal sometimes, I'll talk policy sometimes, but nothing here is meant as legal advice, nothing here is meant as lobbying, there's no call to action. Rather, what I do hope you'll hear is, just as Robin said, how unprecedented this moment is. Throughout my entire career, which as Robin said has been a few decades now, we have had the luxury, although it was filled with challenge as well, of having at least broad alignment on the ends that we're trying to achieve. Different levels of priority, different levels of commitment, and big debates over means. But what we're seeing now is a very, very different set of ends and priorities than we've seen from the federal level in any administration. And I wish I could tell you that it's okay, you can separate the signal from the noise by the things that are really urgent and important, and then all the other stuff, like that Eisenhower grid. But when you put it out there, everything's in that upper right corner, right? There's a lot happening all at once, and so it's hard to do that. And so what we're gonna do is talk about 10 big things. I will give you some solace and say, it's my judgment over the last year that the 10 things haven't changed tremendously, right? In fact, they wrote a manifesto about them. The person who wrote the chapter in Project 2025 is the right hand to Secretary McMahon in the Department of Education. There's some clarity here. We can get past the uncertainty, but it is a lot. So we'll talk briefly about efforts to eliminate the U.S. Department of Education and indeed reduce capacity at other agencies, to reduce the federal role and put both new authority and new responsibilities on states, to reduce funding for public education and safety net programs and at the same time increase public funds for private and religious schools, efforts to eliminate so-called DEI and really reverse civil rights enforcement, as well as redefining gender equity rights, particularly for transgender youth, big efforts to both disrupt and remake higher education on multiple dimensions, obviously efforts related to increased immigration enforcement and reduced benefits and rights that are including in the education context, limits and confusion in education R&D and data, and then some other priorities that I think emerge perhaps even with some room for bipartisanship around early childhood education or AI or workforce, but at the same time not so fast, right? This is not so much a framework as maybe a way to think about it in a list that is manageable and sensible. But as I talk about each of these, I apologize in advance for how much room this is to cover. I want to lay it all out so that you can dive deeper with the panel in the areas that you most want to know about and that many of them are incredibly expert on. So very briefly, let's start with efforts to eliminate the Department of Education. This began very early on with campaign commitments, with early executive orders. It was manifested in an early reduction in force that brought the Department of Education, far and away the smallest cabinet agency in government, down to about half its size. But the most recent effort have been through these interagency agreements to move pieces of the Department of Education to other agencies. Just yesterday, they announced 2 more IAAs, including affecting community schools programs, right? I will say these things are very much being made up as they go, with the exception of the first IAA. The Department of Education employees are still in the department working on details to other agencies. How will these work? They've never been used this way before. And there's pretty significant legal prohibitions to these actions, including long-standing appropriations language against transfer of funds like this that were maintained in the most recent bipartisan FY26 appropriations law. There's lawsuits pending. We'll see how this plays out. But again, coming back to this question of do we want a coherent, accessible, experienced Department of Education leading with states a national agenda or not? That's really the crux of the debate. Second, efforts to reduce federal role and transfer responsibilities to states. There's two dimensions to this. One is the Department of Education has really led in areas like R&D, data, civil rights enforcement. If they're not going to do those things, who is? And at the same time, there's an effort to try to really promote state authority in education through secretarial priorities and particularly through ESEA waivers, which have been used before, including by Secretary Duncan, to advance growth models and accountability and things like that. But now it's much more about how far they can move toward block granting. Third, efforts to reduce federal education funding, safety net funding. Obviously, this began and continues with huge cuts to federal education grants and non-renewals that are at various stages of challenge. There were proposals to significantly decrease core education funding for both formula and competitive programs. But I will say here at the end, then, you've got right now a bit of a tale of two cities. On the one hand, Congress did perhaps the most normal thing we've seen in a year, which is say in their FY26 appropriations law, that's nice that the president has a budget request, but we're going to pass a bipartisan bill that's largely going to level fund education programs and continue them through the next year. It's an important piece of the puzzle. At the same time, in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and forgive all the acronyms, but OBA, there was huge cuts to critical safety net programs, particularly Medicaid and SNAP, that will have big consequences, as well as we'll talk about financial aid and higher ed and tax credits and what can even be done to mitigate a bit. So again, two big issues here, nothing done yet. At the same time, efforts to expand funding for private and religious schools. And I think this includes the single most significant federal policy action that's been taken thus far this year. That's the enactment of this new education tax credit for donations to scholarship granting organizations to support what could be tuition to private and religious schools, or could potentially also be wrapping an ecosystem of supports around each and every child. I'm going to talk about this one thing in depth at the end of my comments to give an example of what I think is both a big risk and opportunity and a big responsibility for state leadership to figure out which it is and what you can make it. Fifth, efforts to prohibit DEI and really reverse civil rights enforcement. I can't say this more directly. What the administration is seeking to do through a continuing series of actions is to make it unlawful for any actor, a public actor, a recipient of federal funds, a private actor working through contracts, like a foundation, for example, to take action that is intentionally about closing gaps in opportunity or outcomes by race. That's the end result of what happens here. Beginning with an effort to, in vague and overbroad terms, really critique DEI, never defined, to have a very broad reading of the Supreme Court's SFFA decision, to even the point where it's not about race being used as a factor, but rather anything intentionally based on race. And then you say, well, wait a minute, don't we have a legal obligation to avoid actions that would have an unjustified disparate impact by race? And they say, good point, so we're just going to eliminate the disparate impact standard. And if we don't have disparate impact, why do we need disaggregated data, right? Now the latest action, and we've seen this before, but now they're trying to do it government, is to build these interpretations into federal grant agreements with threat of the False Claims Act. Again, a lot of litigation here. I should say, again, I told you this isn't legal advice, here's my legal advice. DEI is not unlawful, right? There are actions you could take under any set of terms that would raise legitimate legal concerns. But we need to separate, again, the signal from the noise. Gender equity rights, particularly actions with regard to transgender students on both Title IX and FERPA, and a Supreme Court decision to that extent. Higher education, I wish I had the full amount of time to talk about the array of actions being taken here to, again, both disrupt what I think the administration sees as a liberally based system and remake it in a very different image. And so there's a host of strategies. Obviously, a huge number of enforcement actions, cancellations of grants without due process. When the stick doesn't necessarily work, you go for the carrot of the compact. Big changes to student loan availability and repayment plans. The thing I want to highlight that we think is coming next is really this focus on accreditation. So in order to be able to receive federal funds as an institution, you have to be accredited. And the idea is, can they pressure or change the standards of accreditors to either prohibit things like focus on DEI or even require that they seek to eliminate DEI? We will see. Immigration enforcement. There's really three different dimensions that this is impacting education, and Robin talked about one that I think is perhaps most profound, and that is increased enforcement and the impact it's having not only on immigrant children and families, but all children and families. And the big shift here was obviously eliminating the long-standing guidance around protected areas for enforcement in schools, universities, churches. But there's other strategies here too. One is to greatly expand what is known as public benefits that are not available to immigrant children and families, or some immigrant children and families, and then to reduce rights for English learners, for birthright citizenship. The piece I want to really hold up is the threat to the Plyler decision, which is a decision about 40 years ago, 5-4, where the Supreme Court held that if a state's going to offer education, then it needs to offer it equitably to all persons in the state, including all immigrant children in the state. But there's concerted efforts. Heritage just put out a playbook last week to get states to try to pass laws to challenge and get the Supreme Court to overturn that decision. Limiting education R&D and data. One of the first things that the administration did through DOGE, because it could, is cancel almost $1 billion in federal education R&D grants. And now, even though there's discussions about reimagining, rebuilding IES, we really haven't seen that action. At the same time, there's a lot of limits and complications of access to data. And some of that is about terminations in grants and contracts, and some of that is about just lack of capacity within the department to clean data, to make data available. Again, you can see the need for state leadership and responsibility. And then finally, there are some other issues that I don't think have really been administration priorities per se, but have been impacted by other priorities. The one I want to mention most here is early childhood education. On the one hand, there's been huge implications by the reductions in force, the immigration enforcement, anti-DEI efforts, the latest efforts, obviously, in regulatory changes and withholdings of funds in child care. At the same time, there's been really important continuing investments in Head Start, in CCDBG, even in PDG, the Preschool Development Grants Program, and in tax credits, including, what are we calling it, our early investment accounts. Thank you very much. So this is a lot, and you guys were very patient, but I want to at least give you what we see as a bird's eye view of what is being sought and how, and what it means for not only where we are today, but where we might be in the year ahead. I want to come back to this question of, okay, where then do you see the risks and opportunities? And I'm going to choose the example of the education tax credit that was enacted as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So very briefly, as you know, a new tax credit up to $1,700 per taxpayer for funds to nonprofit scholarship granting organizations that give scholarships to eligible students for qualified elementary and secondary expenses, right? A lot of definitions of terms there, and you all know a version of this until recently in Illinois, so maybe have better sense of it than other states. SGOs are nonprofit scholarship granting organizations. Eligible students, very broadly defined. This is not a targeted program. Qualified expenses, particular premium on tuition, particularly for private and religious schools, but also the potential for other programs like tutoring, after school, summer learning, workforce programs, computer technology, support services for all kids, including public school kids. Let me be clear, if your goal in a program were to provide public funding for those kids most in need, and to do it in a way that strengthened and supported our public schools, this is not the program you would enact. That is not the reason it was enacted. So the question is, what do we make of it now that it is here? My understanding of karate, and believe me when I say it is just an understanding, is that when someone throws a punch, you can try to block it, or sometimes you can try to use their leverage to flip them over your shoulder. That's, in a sense, I think, the decision point that we have. And it's going to depend on a number of things, but remember, this could become the largest federal investment in education quite quickly and easily. It won't happen overnight, but given just the sheer number and no cap on the spending, we could see a huge amount of money. And again, I think it's a tale of two pathways. There's a private voucher pathway that's pretty clear and obvious. And then there's this question of could we use this to build an ecosystem around all kids, including all public school kids? Whether or not that is true is going to require both effort and patience, in my estimation, on at least three dimensions. One is, how do we work now to do everything we can to get Treasury and the federal government to try to answer some key questions in a way that promotes state authority? Can states set conditions on the SGOs that they recognize? Are qualified expenses available for a wide array of services? These conversations that are happening with Treasury right now are not purely partisan. There's a lot of Republican leaders that are looking for that kind of state authority too. And then if that authority emerges, what are the kinds of systems and conditions states need to put in place? How do they define school? Is pre-K defined as part of elementary and secondary that could be paid for by these scholarships, for example? And what are the requirements that they would want to put on SGOs? What are the incentives for certain uses? And then finally, if this goes forward, who are these SGOs? Who are these providers? Who's running this campaign? Ultimately, states have to determine whether to participate or not, and one would think there'd be a push to do that before the end of this year when donations can begin in 27, but it doesn't have to be the case. It could be something that is thought of in out years. Okay, I give this as an example of risk and opportunity because the pathway isn't easy, but that's why state leadership is so important. So in this moment, I'll wrap up by saying we need firefighters and architects, right? Some of these systems, many of these systems are critically important to defend. And I want to thank and recognize many in this state in particular who have been pushing to defend. But these are never the systems that we would have built if we were trying to build what's needed to provide the kind of equitable opportunity for every child to achieve their full potential. And so we'd be crazy to try to defend or build back the status quo. How do we, for lack of a better term, build back better? And there's so much we know, including the science of learning and development, about what that would take and look like. I wish I had more time without that 1 minute sign up to talk with you about that. But I will lead you with this thought of some things that the state should think about, and hopefully we can get into a little bit more on the panel. Do not over-comply. It's incredibly hard, but this is where cover and leadership can come in. Build on strengths. You have a lot of them in Illinois, even if they're newer, like equitable funding formulas, right? Build on those. Be strategic and courageous in the firefighting, including on the litigation. Enhance the infrastructure to protect the most vulnerable students. Maybe that means additional support around civil rights. We didn't talk about the elimination of the disparate impact standard in great detail, but maybe there's something there that the state can do. Mitigate impact on social safety net. Medicaid, SNAP. What is the state system for ensuring that people can meet work requirements, for example, and demonstrate that? Build allies. You notice it's very hard to fight a fire on your own. If you're fighting a fire on your own, something's gone horribly wrong, right? So how do we build together in this moment? And then finally, seize those opportunities to lead. They are there, whether it's workforce, Pell, or tax credit. We can't just play defense, we've got to play offense. Okay. There's a lot of resources at your disposal from us. I will say, not since my days in the White House have I woken up every day to have a 7:30, 8 a.m. stand-up call, but that's been my life over the last year, which is why, Rob and I look as old as I look. But as a consequence, we're pleased to try to put out something that, among other things, tracks in great detail every action that's been taken, as well as a recent piece that tries to look back at what I just talked to you today in prose. And so you can read it. You don't have to take pictures of it, but please shoot this code or let me know how I can be helpful. Thank you all for listening. I'm going to turn it over to Robin, and we'll get into our panel.
All right, we have a crazy good panel, and the goal of the panel is to humanize this. This is a lot. How is this showing up in Illinois? We're going to keep Scott involved because Scott's going to be able to hear that and then offer some suggestions along the way. But I'll start here. Kristin Humphries is the longstanding superintendent at East Moline. Before that, he was a principal, teacher. I don't know. There's probably not much that Kristin hasn't done. But I first met Kristin when he was championing evidence-based formula. He is absolutely a stalwart, very clear-headed, visionary leader, and we're delighted to have you, Kristin. Thanks for being with us. Does anybody here not know Z. Scott? Raise your hand if you don't already know Z. Scott and think she's wonderful and admirable. She's done everything. She is prosecuted. She's worked at law firms, but she is now the president of Chicago State University. They are darn lucky to have her. She has been visionary. She has brought people together to talk about incredibly critical issues, and from a vantage point at one of the only historically black serving institution in Illinois, has important things to say and has been leading with a lot of strategy and a lot of vision. Z, thank you so much for joining us. Rebecca Vonderlack-Navarro, there isn't much that gets by. I have been working with Rebecca from day one at Advance Illinois. She's been at the Latino Policy Forum. She has been directing their policy work for a very, very long time. They now work in the early childhood all the way through the higher education space. And Rebecca is tireless. And what I love most about Rebecca is that she is data-informed, research-driven. If she has a question, she just goes and gets a research project started on it. And darned if she doesn't learn things that she ends up then saying, we now know something and we've got to do something about it, and then she does. So you work on that life cycle in a way that I so respect and so admire. So thank you for joining us tonight, Rebecca. Cara Hendrickson's probably the person here you know the least. You're like, who is this Cara Hendrickson person? Well, let me tell you who this Cara, and you're all gonna wanna buy her a drink, and it's free, so this is your chance. Cara she's done all these things. She's a lawyer. She worked at the Attorney General's office for many, many years, and she did all sorts of laudatory and important things, the consent decree, all sorts of important things. Then she left, and she's like, I should probably earn a little money. She worked at a few firms, but not for very long because her heart's in public service. So then she led Impact for Equity, which used to be Business and Professional People for the Public Interest, known as BPI, for those of us who know and love it. And then she said, you know what? This is a crazy world that we're living in, and the Attorney General's office is going to have a lot of work on its hands, and they needed someone to head up a federal response division. And she's got a much fancier title than that. What is it? The Executive Deputy General at the Illinois Attorney General's office. But what I tell people is she's the one running all that federal response. Can we just give her some applause? That's awesome. So whenever you hear about a lawsuit and you're like, yes, get in there, or you hear about a result, thank her. Do a little toast, but you can buy her a drink tonight. And then Scott, you've already met and we already applauded you, so no more applause for you. You'll get a big head. All right. So I just want to humanize this for just a minute. And Kristin, I'm going to start with you. Grants have been coming, they've been going, they've been freezing. You've been told all of a sudden you can't talk about diversity or equity and inclusion at a time when I know that's something that actually, in East Moline is a real issue that you focused on. How is all of this blizzard showing up for you, either on the funding side or on the directive side?
Yeah, no, it's East Moline is a wonderful, beautiful, diverse place. We speak almost 50 languages in the East Moline School District. Our students, we come from a lot of poverty, and we live in a place where our families appreciate the education they receive. So this is a big deal to us. And our parents dream of infinite possibilities just like families everywhere. And so back in 2010, I became superintendent for East Moline Schools. And then by 2011, I realized that as superintendent, we had to be proactive in how we were going to find ways to fund our school district. We were one of the most underfunded systems in the entire state. So I joined up with Advance Illinois, and for those of you that know and love Dr. Teresa Ramos, she was our person that made sure we were on the straight and narrow. I love Teresa, and if you know her, you will love her, but she's one of the most fiercest advocates. So my long story short is we knew we had to be proactive. And we were, in 2017, when it finally passed, we were under 20 days cash on hand in the East Moline School District. Mm. For the first time since 2017, this summer, my board's looking at me saying, okay, we're hearing this stuff coming out of Washington. We get we receive millions of dollars in federal funding. What are we doing, Kristin? And I didn't have a good answer for him. So I knew we had to be proactive again. And we are being proactive with our legislators. And it's easy to talk to our legislators here in Illinois, but obviously they don't control the levers in Washington right now. So we're out borrowing money right now. We're borrowing working cash because our students, our board, have always been a champion. They've always said, Kristin, I know we don't have the money, but we'll figure it out. Well, we don't have the money, but we're going to figure it out because we're not going to stop serving our children. We're not going to stop giving those really good services. We don't teach EL. We don't teach English learning in East Moline. We are English learners. And we're very passionate about that, and our families appreciate that, and we're working hard, and we're borrowing that money because we want to keep it up. And we have a director of EL and equity. There were school districts around us that had individuals with similar titles, and they were talking about dropping those titles. We're not dropping that title. We're proud of our equity work here in East Moline, and we're going to continue that. So the short answer to your question is it had a chilling effect. And for the first time since evidence-based funding was passed, it brought those thoughts back. What do we do? Because we have to keep this going. Our kids deserve it.
And one quick follow-up. I'm of the view, we're a bipartisan organization, and that was never a difficult thing for me because I think what brings us together around education is so much greater than what divides us. But boy, I think people are working hard to find the ways to divide us and to politicize things that have never been political. Education, data, meeting children where they are is not. That's all equity is, and we all agree on it. Are you finding it harder to work with people in the community and or fellow superintendents? Has it had a harmful effect on those collective communal relationships?
What's interesting is, no, it has not. And what's interesting is I'm on the Iowa-Illinois border, and I chair the Education Council for our United Way here in the Quad Cities. 4 Iowa superintendents, 4 Illinois superintendents. My Iowa counterparts, they come to these meetings and they say, we can't say the words inclusion. We can't talk about social emotional learning. And our Illinois superintendents are looking, and we're just thankful that we have a state and a governor that says, you know what, we're not running and hiding from the good stuff. Our families and kids deserve it.
Thank you, Kristin. Z, you guys sat in the order that the questions are. Did somebody tell you that, or is that just dumb luck? We're just that good. All right, Z, I'd love you to do the same. Can you just share a little bit? Because, I mean, higher ed, you guys have been in the crosshairs of every possible thing that's happened. How is that showing up? What's been the most problematic and troubling for you?
First of all, I want to say happy birthday to Jelani. And I also want to thank Robin for making everybody afraid to say they don't know who I am. But first of all, it's been a tough year, and there is no place that I can start where I can't say that there wasn't pain injected into our higher education system. I want to thank our government affairs leaders who are here, Aaron Steva, our Senior Vice President and Director, Julian Holland, because they've been working overtime along with the other government affairs people. And so it started with the Dear Colleague letter, and then you say to yourself, it's on, right? It is on. Because, you know, the last few years we've enjoyed a stable funding for our public higher education institutions. I came in as a president. Shortly thereafter, Governor Pritzker became governor of Illinois, and then all of a sudden there started to be capital money and MAP money and things that stabilized and made education more accessible for our students. And then came a new administration and new federal policy. And like Representative Hernandez said, it's personal for me. I grew up in the Jim Crow South, long past the time when segregation was illegal. In the South, it was still legal, and I went to separate but unequal schools. But the NAACP Legal Defense Fund fixed that for us and created a more stable system for public higher education. Then overnight in Illinois, it all changed. We started to lose grants. We have lost 25% of our grant portfolio, things that were designed to give better access for African American and brown students to be in laboratories, to be teachers, to be educators. It all went away overnight. For the first time in our history, we had a Carnegie classification as a research institution, and our faculty lost those research opportunities. We were the lead grant holder for the Lewis-Stokes Alliance for Minority Participants in STEM, which meant that we supported 15 other institutions in Illinois, including UIC and the Allegan National Laboratories, and giving STEM opportunities for students who are typically locked out. Only 5% of the PhDs in this country are Black. So we know that there is a problem. The data does not support what is happening in our state. And so when I went to our board chair and I said, Chair, what am I supposed to do at a time when many of our university presidents are running from the problem? She said, as an institution, as Chicago State, we cannot run. She empowered me to be courageous and brave about what we were experiencing. And what we are experiencing as public institutions is a lot. Across this state, the public university presidents have a close alliance with one another, even though our student populations may be different, but our missions are to support the students who want to get higher education here in Illinois. And what has happened is we have lost 60 grants totaling over $100 million. Imagine what that does to the economy of our state, the opportunities for students in our state. And then came the other hard part. We are a predominantly Black institution under the Higher Education Act of 2008. It was legislation that was championed by then Senator Barack Obama. And what we have received from the Department of Education is that your status as a predominantly Black institution, like 66 other universities and community colleges across the country, is no longer valid. And as a result, we are taking opportunity away from you. That grant that you had is gone. That grant that supported your students is gone. And then they went after the minority serving institutions in our state. There are 30 of them in our state and other hundreds across the country. $350 million was taken from minority serving institutions and sent to historically black colleges and other institutions. Again, attempting to divide and conquer institutions that we have much in common with. It is not fair. It is not equitable, and it is not just. But what it has done is created a lack of access for our students. But we have an opportunity in Illinois to do something that is historic, and Advance Illinois is involved in that. We have an opportunity to take a close look and kick the tires on a project that has been underway for 3 years. It is called the Equitable Funding Formula. We worked for this on 3 years, supported by the Illinois Board of Higher Education, to get the work done. I want to thank Senator Lightfoot and Representative Ammons for their tireless work on this project, but now we have a funding formula that will bring equity to the way that funding comes from our state legislators and your tax dollars to our higher education institutions. It is not a project that was a fly-by-night thing. We worked hard on this, and it is now in front of the General Assembly. And I urge each of you to understand that funding formula and what it can do for our students and our institutions in Illinois. Because the fight is not over. Policy decisions that are impacting our institutions, particularly our poor, our rural, and our diverse students, will continue to come. So now it's time for Illinois to do something that supports its institutions, a project that many of you acknowledge is long overdue.
What I appreciate about that, yeah, you can applaud for that. What I appreciate about that is that the theme of this is, look, we're getting hit with things that are outside of our control, but there are things that are in our control, and what are we going to do about those? So I appreciate, ZU, finding some, here's what we might be able to do, because you guys really are under attack in a whole lot of ways. I don't know how you've survived this year, so did somebody get her a drink from the bar? Just go to straight tequila for you. All right. Rebecca, you guys were at the front. One of the things I'm so proud of in Illinois, and I think Scott would echo that it is unusual that not other states have done this, is the SALT Act, and the saying, look, we already got some sanctuary spots, but one of the first things that the administration did, I think everybody knows this, is say that schools, hospitals, churches, places like that were no longer safe spaces, that immigration enforcement could happen there, which had never been the case. And that, too, had been a bipartisan issue. I just want to say, I think part of what I've been grappling with is these things were not things that we fought about across lines. And so one of the things that we did as a state is we responded and passed legislation. You guys were in the middle of that, as were others, to make sure that we took, early child care centers, community colleges, universities, and made those safe spaces, put protocols into place. And I think my question to you is that going to be enough? What's next? And this is obviously, even if the administration changed tomorrow, we're going to be living with long-term consequences from this. So talk a little bit about that.
And I don't think we can underestimate just how detrimental this administration has been to the immigrant community and our schools with declining enrollment, academic decline. I am incredibly worried about attendance and the long-term consequences. And it's not just immigrant kids, it's affecting the whole community. And I think you're right about Plyer v. Doe being the big question that we're going to see. So I do think it's a really big deal that Illinois was pioneering in passing this.
Does she need to move where she's talking?
Can you guys not hear me? When I turn that way, so just go like that. So don't talk to Robin.
Talk over there.
So I was just saying how bad it's been, right, for immigrant communities. And we can't downplay it and how much it's affected attendance and affected the whole learning community in general. I do want to extend my deep gratitude to the Latino caucus, to having a governor that has been steadfast in pushing back against ICE enforcement. ICER and MALDEF were really amazing partners in getting those bills passed. It was fast. It was extremely hard to do under a lot of pressure. I think, though, the impact of those bills and their success is really going to be around their implementation. And I think we've had some start to this with guidance that's been issued by the State Board of Education. The Illinois Department of Early Childhood is doing some amazing work with guidance and working with advocates, including us, to get information out there. But I really think we're going to need to embark on an issue education campaign so that folks on the ground really understand their rights and what the bill's about. So we're leading the development of short videos, one-pagers. We're going to purchase social media ads. We're going to translate those in the top 5 languages spoken in Illinois so that early childhood providers know what's going on, families in K-12, and our public colleges and universities know what's going on. Ultimately, what I'm really worried about, and you're going to hear me talk about this more and more, we want to incentivize folks to attend their child cares, attend their K-12 schools, go back to our college campuses. In October alone, WBEZ was reporting that Latino concentrated schools had a drop of attendance by 14%. Even missing 5 days of school, a week of instruction, University of Chicago, University of Illinois, will show that this has a negative impact on kids. We know that some of those kids were reaching chronic absenteeism, 18 days of school. It is extremely difficult to do well academically when you miss that many days of schools. So we're going to have to come together to really think about how we get kids back in school.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate all the foregoing effort. We rely on that, we count on that, we follow it. And I'm going to skip Cara for 1 second. Scott, my question to you is, I asked you this earlier today, and I didn't know the answer, and it was shocking. How many lawsuits are currently pending in the education space around generally in the country, and what would be more typical?
Expert next to me, so it's a great segue.
No, I'm going to segue.
Hundreds of lawsuits. This is far different from anything we've experienced before, and the way they're being resolved in lower courts is very different than the few that you see going up on emergency orders to the Supreme Court. So,
but is that typical? How many would there typically be? So 5 years ago, how many lawsuits were?
A handful.
A handful. So, Cara, that brings us to you. How many lawsuits is Illinois engaged in relating to some of these over the past year, the federal activity?
Yeah, thanks for that, Robin. We have filed, as of Friday, the state of Illinois has filed 55 lawsuits in what we call our federal accountability docket. And I just want to take a second here. Thank you. Robin gave me a very generous introduction, and I do really appreciate the applause.
She's going to rebut me.
But I'm the lawyer on the panel. I don't know if you can hear me. There are a lot of lawyers up here. There are a lot of lawyers on. Fair enough. Fair enough.
You can be the lawyer, though.
I'm going to speak in lawyerly ways and say, the Attorney General's office absolutely falls into the firefighter category that we saw up on the board. But I do really want to acknowledge at the outset the point that if you're fighting a fire alone, you're in trouble. Mm-hmm. The 55 lawsuits, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in a second, are really the result absolutely of the tireless efforts of the lawyers in our office who are taking on these cases on top of their regular caseloads, which continue. But they are also the result of many of the people in this room. So if you know me, it's really because I have called you with 48 hours notice and begged you to help us develop the facts, the evidence, the legal arguments, the expertise that we rely on to be able to make these cases, to be able to plead them and file them very quickly, and the ability to be successful. So it really is a team effort across the state to be engaging in this litigation. So thank you. You'll continue to hear from us. We do really appreciate it. So of the 55 cases that we have filed, though, Robin, about 25% of them I defined, I think too narrowly, as cases focused just on education. There are issues, obviously, across a broad spectrum of what we call federal accountability work, but education has been particularly an area of challenge. So the Attorney General's office files these cases, gets involved in litigation when we believe there is a violation of the Constitution or a violation of federal law, and the state as a corporate entity or our instrumentality, so sometimes that is school districts, sometimes that is public universities, are impacted. So we are not litigating every case. We don't have standing to litigate every case, but we are looking for opportunities with all of your help to fight back. So it's been about a year since this administration has been in place. Of those 55 cases, we have been able to protect so far about $6.6 billion in money that should have come to the state of Illinois, and we've been able to recover it. Of those dollars, about $2.7 billion alone have been education dollars. And when I'm talking about education dollars here, I'm really talking about early childhood, K-12, higher education. There are lots of ways that we've talked broadly about issues that impact education. But just to put some numbers around the depth of the significance of the issues that Robin and Scott have talked about, this is enormous, enormous money for the state of Illinois. But it's not just about money, right? As we've talked about here, it's about a variety of issues.
That's what I was going to have you go into is there are, I'm going to use a money issue to segue into sort of the broader issues, because it's not an education issue. I caught the news. I read the news a little bit like a horror movie now, so I miss things. But I didn't miss this, that we were denied some disaster relief funds. And that doesn't seem like that's an education issue, but at the same time that the president announced who was getting it and who wasn't, he was talking about which states went big for him. And I thought, gosh, if we allow that to become normal, that we are making decisions, basic decisions about disaster relief based on which state you're in and what the politics are, heaven help us all. And I believe we filed a lawsuit on that. And I ask that because that's going to show up in education. If that's okay, if that's the way we're going to do things, which I hope to God it is not. So what's the legal lay of the land for some of those bigger picture things that are going to show up in all corners, including ours?
I mean, you're absolutely right that some of the cases that we have filed span all the states, as far as we can tell, right? Some of those things have to do with, we think of them as like the who of education. We've talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We haven't talked yet about attacks, for example, on our sex ed curriculum, right? Those sorts of challenges and the effort to sort of, from our perspective, narrow who benefits from our educational institutions, we have seen sort of implemented in many instances across the country. They have particular import for us in Illinois because they are contrary to our state laws, they are contrary to our values, and we have been fighting back. There have also been a number of instances, and I would say particularly increasing in the past 3 months, where we have seen attacks focused on a subset of states. So, for example, tomorrow we will be in court on a case that we filed last week challenging $600 million in terminations by the CDC. So these are public health dollars. That $600 million is spread among 4 states only. So state programs that are federally required, they are the same across all 50 states, have been terminated in only 4 states. You can probably guess who they are. They are California, Colorado, Minnesota, and Illinois. And this is not the only case and the only instance like this. So we do see the politicization of what used to be considered nonpartisan issues across the board.
Well, this is one, and for those of you, some people here know, and are participants, some people don't. Advance Illinois convenes the Illinois Federal Education Response Group, which we creatively called IFERG, and we meet every 3 weeks, and we update on all the lawsuits and the legal cases, including things like this that seem over here, but I think are really directly relevant to whether or not we're going to start to see dollars disappear. Not because they're doing it everywhere, but because we're being targeted. So I appreciate that. I have more questions for you, but I'm going to come back to Kristin for a minute. Kristin, one of the things I want to give, one of the things also, little advertisement, you have at your place, Josh, can I have you hold up that pamphlet? You have at your place a pamphlet. We like to give you materials. It's what we do. And this is our effort. Again, it's a lot to try to break down sort of categories of issues. And one of the things, there are many things that we could do as a state. We probably can't do them all. And so one of the things I'm about to challenge each of our panelists for is, what is the issue that you think is the most important for us to keep our eye on? With all the stuff going on, this is the ball we've got to keep our eye on. What do you need this room, which is filled with state leaders, to be deeply focused on so that you can continue to get to do what you need to do in Moline?
There are 2 things that come to mind, and I don't want to sit this close to Robin because she might conk me for the first one. So I'm a big believer. We've always advocated for the $350 million for evidence-based funding, and I'm going to recognize Representative Will Davis, one of the big champions. always advocated for that $350 million, and Advance Illinois and in their advocacy has always asked for, let's try and get $550 million to accelerate this. It's important we do this. And I've always felt really guilty about that. I'll just tell you honestly, because that fight was so hard, and I'm so thankful. And when I look at times like now and what the impact is going to be to school districts like East Moline that aren't going to have boards that have the bonding ability to go out and get more money, it's going to have a negative impact. They're going to have second graders that can't have a new second grade year a year later when they pull this funding. Those kids are not going to get the good stuff that all kids should be getting. And if there was ever a year where Illinois had a magic pot of beans, this would be the year for the $550 million to protect those Tier 1 school districts to make that happen.
Well, I'm not going to conk you for that. That was great.
I thought you were going to conk me for not advocating for $550 before this.
Never, 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 never. All right, I appreciate that. And Zia, I'm going to ask you the same question. Now, you partially answered it with your former answer about the adequate equitable funding formula, and that may be it, but what is it we cannot lose focus on and that we've got to be vigilant on so that no matter where we end up in a few years, we're ready?
Well, we need to be vigilant on the fact that philanthropy can't fix this. And while, organizations like Advance Illinois and other philanthropic organizations have come forward to help us in several respects to restore some of the incredibly successful programs that we had to support students in need, they can't do it all. And so as we look at the modification of SNAP benefits, when there was a threat to SNAP, we realized that 25% of our students qualified for SNAP benefits. And we went to our foundation, and our president is here, Melanie Silas, I'll recognize her. But we went to our foundation, and they instantly created a pathway for us to give students immediate access to food through gift cards and foods at grocery stores. That cannot be the long-term solution to how we advance good public policy when it comes to the underserved. So we got to keep our eyes on what's really happening. We're going to see a lack of access. We're going to see the poor become poor. We're going to see the middle class, those that were headed to the middle class, now be locked out. So really pay attention to the things that Scott talked about. Don't be on a fire by yourself. Go look for friends. And that's what we're going to need to do right now. Everybody needs to make a friend.
Rebecca, how would you answer that?
This was hard for me. Can you guys hear me? I moved my mic. So I am.
I think you need to hold it.
Should I hold it? Because
It's all that hair. You've got way too much hair.
all right, you can hear me now, right? Yeah. So I struggle to answer this question because I am passionate about a number of investments in early childhood, K-12, higher ed. I hear all that, and the forum works in support of all that. But I think the biggest crisis in education in front of us is attendance. It's attendance. I want us all thinking about this a lot. Currently, a student is considered chronically absent when they miss 10% of school days. I'm not a numbers. That didn't sound like a lot to me. You know what that is? That's 18 days of school. That's almost a month of instruction. Now, if you forget everything else I say today, in 2025, guess how many kids were missing about a month or more of instruction? Guess. 1 in 4. And it's higher for kids of color, it's higher for low-income kids, and those numbers are before all this ICE activity. So I think there's a lot we're going to need to do, but I do think school accountability can play a role in this. And I think school attendance needs to be complemented with supportive interventions so that we can intervene before a student begins to fall behind. So currently in school accountability, it's called the consistent attendance metric. In school accountability, it's set at 10%. It's set at 18 days. Hear me, this high number of days risks masking early warning signs that students are beginning to disengage, delaying timely interventions and support. We got to look at the research. University of Chicago, University of Illinois, they tell us 10 days, 10 days. 18 days is too permissive. We need it at 10. There's even problems at 5 days, but it's not to be punitive. I'm not the girl talking about being punitive. I was just talking about ICE interventions. These are early warning indicators so we can step in with relationship-driven strategies. That's the proactive family outreach. That's the home visits. That's the community schools. We've got tons of trauma.
So your point is these are expectations that we are in charge of, even in the crazy. And I do want to emphasize your point. I think the other thing that has been troubling, and I know it is to many folks here, is that because there's so much noise, we don't get to do our basic knitting. It distracts us from the work we all want to do, what we're all here to do, because we're running around putting out fires which we need to do. That firefighter's going to stick with us forever,
Democrat,
Scott.
This is rural, urban, this is suburban,
Absolutely.
this is everybody.
No, I appreciate
got to lean
that.
in because we're not even going to do well in college. The research is clear. The GPA is going to go down, the test scores are going to go down, and we're all going to be looking around and saying, what happened?
Appreciate your saying. So keep our eye on that ball despite all this other
Not
stuff.
pointing a finger at teachers. We are not going to be punitive. We
right.
work together.
And I am going to be asking you this too, Scott, as advice for Illinois. Cara, one of the other things I thought might be interesting for you to tell folks, you can say, what do we need? What are the cases that you think are going to be the most critical, either that have already happened or need to be brought? But how have you guys also reorganized at AG? You've got 30 seconds or less to tell us, but I want people to understand you guys have really adjusted. You guys have really adjusted.
I will say that we have adjusted by just doing more. So I think one thing I would say about sort of looking forward, things that we need to do, like gird ourselves for the fight. We have a team of lawyers who, again, are doing these cases on top of their regular caseload, and we are only in year one. And we are in court all the time on temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions. We're filing emergency motions. We have lawyers working overnight, across the weekends, routinely. And so being prepared that this is going to, for us, collectively, again, the collectively us, you see how we're all in this firefight together, this is going to be 3 years from a litigation and other pushback perspective of being able to sustain that fight. And that's daunting. That is daunting. I want to name it and be clear that that is a challenge for us going forward. I also, if I can, want to just really be grateful for this forum and this fantastic resource because, well done, I don't know, because
that was all us. That was all us.
Oh, great, okay.
I was just sitting here.
Unless you didn't like it. If you didn't like it, it was all Scott.
It's fantastic because I will say of the issues across the spectrum, education is one of them. It is critical. There are issues across a variety of areas. We're litigating immigration, we're litigating healthcare, we're litigating fundamental rule of law, constitutional questions, birthright citizenship, elections. There's a long list of basically every aspect, from my perspective, of what makes Illinois, Illinois, that we are litigating. And it is very difficult to find time to have the conversation not only about the fight, which is important and is what we're focused on in the Attorney General's office, but about what comes next and what we do about it. And so the architecture point and the ability to have convening conversations like this, I think, is so important because both of those things really need to be happening at the same time.
I really appreciate it. We're very glad you're doing what you're doing. Scott, we're almost out of time, but I want to give you the last word on you've listened to how this is showing up here. I know you're seeing this across the country, and what is the advice? What should we not take our eye off? What are those balls that are essential?
First of all, I'm honored to be asked. So much occurs to me. Let me offer one thing that maybe is hopeful. I think we could carry around a perception right now that this agenda that we've talked about is somehow deeply wanted by half the country and deeply opposed by another half of the country, and the part that is for the agenda seems to be dominating. I think that is a false mindset. I think this is an agenda being pursued by a very small number of people in constituencies that right now have significant power. But I don't think it represents a really strong center as well as left or right, however you want to think about that. And I find myself wondering, is Illinois a place not only that has great leadership that's standing in opposition to this agenda, but can also build that kind of more integrated belief about what does an agenda need to be? Notice there was nothing on here about we're going to address chronic absenteeism, or we're going to fix literacy, or we're going to prepare our young people for this incredible age of AI that is ahead. I sometimes worry that if you could look over the tsunami of federal policy actions we just talked about, you'd see a bigger wave coming behind.
We should be talking about it.
We have to, and so that'll be the luncheon next month. I hope you'll all join Advance Illinois. But in all seriousness, maybe there's an opportunity not just to push back, which is absolutely critical, but to rebuild this shared agenda around education that, for all its faults and all the need for great change, has always existed and I really believe still exists.
Well, I appreciate that. As a hopeful note, can you guys join me in a round of applause to thank Because we need to have the big picture, but we need to know how it plays out. Now, while you guys are ever so nicely making your way back to your seats, I'm going to invite up, we've got one last superstar in the House, and I want to appreciate Majority Caucus Appropriations Leader, so many things, Senator L.G. Sims, who's going to close us out. What I appreciate, and the reason I think that Senator Sims is such the perfect person to close us out, if I may be so bold, you have been a champion for people who sometimes need a second chance. You care about criminal justice and criminal justice reform, but you care about it because there are people who have had tough breaks and they've maybe done things, they've been judged by the worst thing they've done and not given those second opportunities. And things like cash bail, which make everything so much harder, not having a chance to expunge records, and you've dedicated yourself to that. And I think that is the heart and the soul of education, is to create those opportunities. I know that's why you're a champion for it. So please help bring us home and send us out with motivation and a little bit of hope.
Amen.
And thank you for being here.
Thanks, Robin. Now, I'm smart enough to know I stand between you and that door also. So I won't be before you long. You know, as I came up here earlier, you know, I'm thinking about what was happening right now as we speak. Right now, as we speak, there is a State of the Union being given that is fomenting fear and leaning into chaos. And one of the comments was talking about how, you know, there is this divide that is happening. You know, we've started to normalize, you know, red and blue, as if that is somehow normal. You know, it's not about red or blue. It's not about left or right. It's about right and wrong. And we have to understand that. We have to understand that it is our responsibility to lean into the issues that are affecting us. You know, it's Black History Month. And that's right. That's right. You don't miss your shout moment. I appreciate that. But I think it's important, particularly for this discussion. You know, there was a quote by Malcolm X that said, "Education is a passport to the future." Because the future belongs to those, so tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. That's what this discussion is all about. While folks are trying to wipe out and erase history that is uncomfortable, and acknowledging that so much of our history is uncomfortable, does not make us not great. Because we are leaning into the challenges that we are faced, does not mean we're not great. We are challenging ourselves to be the best versions of ourselves. And that's what this discussion has been all about. I'm so proud of all of you for being willing to stand up and stand into this discussion and lean into this discussion, because it is very important. Now, as we go and go back to our respective communities and make sure that we're investing in those individuals who maybe never, not just a second chance, never had a first one. Can we acknowledge that? Because so many of our young, that's right. So many of our young people never had the opportunity that so many of us take for granted. That we take for granted the fact that we have 3 meals a day. We take for granted that we have a roof over our head. And that so many of our young people just don't have that. And so many of our families just don't have that. And I think we have to also acknowledge that there is a divide that is being created in this country between the wealthy and the poor. I never call it beautiful, because it was never beautiful. It might have been a bill, but there was nothing beautiful about it. That was the single largest transfer of wealth in the United States, in the history of the United States. And folks are continuing to lean into it, and the wealthy continue to get more and more wealthy. And our young people continue to fall farther and farther behind because they don't have the investments nor the resources to make the difference. Well, I'm here to tell you, this group is committed to making sure that those young people have it. And I want to stand shoulder to shoulder with you as we do that. Thank you so much for your commitment. Thank you so much for your dedication. Thank you so much for your willingness to work on behalf of the people who and many times you may never meet. You may never have the opportunity to stand face to face with them, but you are standing in the gap for them. Thank you. God bless you. Good night, everybody. Thanks for being here.